Good evening, everyone. My name is Anne Reeve, and I am an associate curator at the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. It is a pleasure to gather us all here this evening for our conversation with artist Liz Larner. I do want to take a moment before we begin to thank both Lindsay and Sarah, who are providing closed captioning and ASL interpretation for us for tonight's program. Liz and I are planning to speak for about 45 minutes, and then we will open up for, we hope, about 15 minutes of Q&A. So I would encourage anyone who has questions throughout to use the Q&A prompt at the bottom of your Zoom screen and submit any questions that you might have. So by way of introduction, Liz was born in Sacramento and is based now in Los Angeles, where she is speaking to us this evening from her studio. She began exhibiting publicly in the 1980s and has continued to exhibit widely and prominently ever since. She is the recipient of numerous awards, and her work is represented in museum collections all over the world. She's currently at work on a large-scale exhibition of new work to open next year at the Kunsthalle in Zurich. She's also at work on a retrospective of work which will open next year at the Sculpture Center in New York, and then is set to travel on to the Walker Art Center, which is in my hometown of Minneapolis. While her early work incorporated photography, Liz now operates really as a sculptor and is consistently experimenting with different media and form to investigate sculpture's possibilities. She has worked with a huge array of materials, including ceramic, steel, and cloth, just to name a few. And we'll look at some examples tonight of work that Liz has done throughout her career that incorporate many of these materials. Her recent work has turned especially to issues of environment and sustainability, and pays particular attention to the Anthropocene era in which we're all now living. The Anthropocene being our current era where, for the first time, human forces rather than geologic forces are actively shaping the Earth's environment and physical structure. To spend time with Liz is to understand that all of her thoughtfulness and rigor and experimentation is happening within a large web of her ideas and interests that are always firing. And while those ideas certainly encompass art and the history of art, they also extend far beyond it and include poetry, natural science, philosophy, political sphere, issues surrounding gender, economics, film. The list is very long. For me, though Liz's work never relies on a signature style or subject or method, it ultimately and always affirms the sensibility of someone who is living fully in the world, and at the same time someone who is no pushover, who is curious for answers about the world's oddities and structures, and intent on looking closer than many of us often do at the terms of our material and social culture. Rosetta Brooks has written about Liz's work that, quote, art like this is based on disciplined wondering rather than prescriptive doubting. So I am all for that. I am all for disciplined curiosity, and I look forward to getting into all of this and more. So I will invite you, Liz, to turn on your camera and microphone and join us. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Great to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So yeah, we have an enormous amount of things to talk about and look at this evening, some of which we can go through quickly and some of which we can spend some more time on. But as a start, I thought we could go back to the cultures. We have an example here of a work from 1987. I was reading this wonderful interview that you did in 2006 with the painter Jane Dixon in Bomb magazine. You said something that I really loved, which is that you were aiming to get the literal, the metaphorical, and the theatrical into your work all at once. And for me, that trifecta is really at work here in the cultures, and is also maybe setting up some themes that have proven to be more lasting for you, vis-a-vis instability and control or resilience and maybe vulnerability. But maybe you could, or we could start by hearing from you a bit more about what we are looking at on screen and how this work first came to be.
Yeah, this is of two photographs that are it's actually not the sculpture, but there is a sculpture that contains this, and the one on the left is the fresh version of Orchid Buttermilk Penny, which is the title of this piece. And the one on the right is a photograph that I took of it, I think 3 months later. And so now the piece goes on, and so every time it's installed, there's a new orchid, buttermilk, and a penny, and the penny is always from the year that the piece is made. And then the last one that was once the new one is installed next to it in a kind of a vitrine that they fit into on a plinth.
So what is the medium that these materials are suspended in the petri dish?
Right. So this was kind of like a precursor to the culture pieces that I did, because but there's agar, which is the kind of the nutrient agar, which is the typical base for bacterial cultures. And I was interested in the kind of crossover of that term from the scientific term to the cultural term, and I wanted to play around with that. So in this one, there's the only bacteria that's introduced is that which is from the flower and the penny and the buttermilk. But I've also done it where people have breathed into it, or I've touched something with a little wand. It's called an inoculation wand. You can scrape it over anything and capture the bacteria that's on that surface, and then I would put it over the nutrient agar, which I would always make a red level, a yellow level, and a blue level, so that it could the bacteria could eat down into the nutrient media and create a bloom of life. And then what I didn't really anticipate as much was the inevitable decay.
How long, like what sort of lifespan are we looking at here between the image on the left and the image on the right?
I think it was 3 months.
Okay. Kind of decay.
Yeah, for that much decay. And then the one I think that's going to be in the show, the Sculpture Center, is going to be quite a number of years. So it just depends on when the piece is shown, when the new one is made.
And am I correct in my understanding that the cultures were in a way part of what prompted you to start making sculpture, sort of transitioning to sculpture? How did that work?
Well, I had my degree was in photography, and so it was kind of this weird transition period, kind of like moving from photography to making things, because I realized in school, like, I didn't want to take pictures of things, I wanted to make things. And that's because, I feel like sculptors and being a sculptor, kind of the big picture of that is I work with embodied experience. So, like walking around something and getting your information from it that way. And everything else is kind of the side information that you can get later, like this talk, which is great. But I love that kind of primary experience of being able to move around something and look at all its sides in time and space and at that moment. So yeah, go on.
Oh no, I was going to say that maybe leads us really beautifully into our next slide, which is Bird in Space from just a couple of years after this, 1987. And this is a work that is in the Smithsonian's collection at the American Art Museum. And it is unfortunately one that I've never seen in person. So maybe you can describe it.
Yeah, we'll have a chance because it is going to be in the show that you mentioned that starts at the Sculpture Center. So if anyone knows that Constantine Brancusi's polished bronze sculpture, Bird in Space, it's kind of referring to that and taking that notion of aerodynamics and that was made in the solid and sort of like spreading it out through a room and kind of thinking about flight and freedom and the freedom of flight in a totally different material and way. And you know, as a viewer, you can walk under it and around it, and sometimes it appears, you know, and sometimes it disappears. Like in this picture, I love this picture because you can barely see it.
Sort of disappear on the horizon. I think we have a couple of details of it.
Yeah, it's held to the ground with stainless steel blocks. So those what those rectangle or squares are on the cuboids are on the floor. And so you can see in this picture, you can really see the outline of Brancusi's berg.
Yeah, very clearly. And that sort of tension and lift. And that sense that you were speaking about before of having a really embodied experience where you're sort of interwoven with the work itself. And maybe you can never fully, sculpture I always think of as a medium where you can never get all of the information at once, right? You can never see all of the sides at once. There's always something that's remaining mysterious to you, which is, which I really appreciate about it. Do we have one more image of this? I think just to give people a slightly better. So what's the specific material that you're using here? What's the thread?
It's a nylon cord.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's nylon cord sewn with silk thread and then the stainless steel blocks. Just 3 materials.
Okay. And does it have to be remade every time because the tension gives a bit over time after?
No, it's of all my work, it's the piece that folds up to be the smallest and expands to be the largest. It has quite a ability, and it can adjust to different spaces. So you know, so we can add to the wingspan, so to speak, and allow it to be in a larger space or less. And let's see, I'm forgetting what you just asked, the last question. So yeah, say it again.
I was just sort of wondering if over time the material shifts after it's been sort of installed over time and whether there's any sort of sagging to it or it needs to be remade at all. But it seems like it's pretty robust.
It's been conserved actually by the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and they did a beautiful job there. And it was just because it was over 20 years old, and some of our stitching had kind of broken. My stitching had broken, but it's always in tension, so it doesn't really stretch out. You can always readjust the tension when it's reinstalled.
Okay, beautiful. Well, why don't we go on to the next slide, which is from about 20 years ago, we're jumping from 1989 to 2005. But this is a piece that we don't have to spend too long on it, but I did want to look at it. I mean, with something like the bacteria piece, the cultures that we looked at first, for me, when I think about that, there is a politics that is maybe implicit in that work insofar as I think about the AIDS crisis that was happening in the background while that work was being made. And in the 1987, I think we're still in the early and very dire stages of that crisis. I think Reagan only said the word AIDS publicly for the first time in 1985. With a work like RWB's, what we're looking at, I feel like the political element is a little bit more explicit here, still very, very present. So RWB's was a work that I believe was first shown in Los Angeles in an exhibition at Reagan Projects in 2005. And it is, RWB's stands in plural for red, white, and blue, red, white, and blues. And it is comprised of this cluster of aluminum tubes that are compressed into this kind of chaotic jumble. I think at the time it was my understanding that the sort of invasion of Iraq was front of mind for you here, and that the aluminum tubes, we can perhaps remember were part of really a linchpin in the Bush administration's argument for invading Iraq. It was these aluminum tubes that they said that they had found as, quote, irrefutable evidence that weapons of mass destruction were being made in Iraq. And it was through that argument that they then were able to invade. And of course, we now know that to be completely bogus. And these aluminum tubes have many uses, not just in, or even if at all, make the sort of creation of weapons of mass destruction. But I was rereading again in this same interview with Jane Dixon something from 2006, the year just after this work was made, that struck me, especially in January of 2021, which I wanted to revisit. And I hope she will be okay with my quoting her here. But she says, quote, "RWBs makes me think of mobs. I've been wanting to start painting crowds again. We're totally done with the era of the individual. That was the 20th century, and the 21st century is about mobs, mob psychology, inciting mobs, going along with the crowd, and not wanting to stand out from the crowd, people bombing crowds. As a New Yorker, I take the subway after rush hour because if someone were to blow it up, they'd probably do it at rush hour. Or if I see a large gathering of people, I won't go there. Crowds are dangerous." And, you know, I think with a work like the culture work and like this, it's, you know, the culture work was perhaps made against the backdrop of an AIDS crisis, but now in a global pandemic, you know, resonates perhaps even again in a new way. And with something like RWBs, certainly I, you know, am sitting here in Washington, D.C., having spent much of the day watching and listening to the impeachment play out just a couple of miles from my home. And this, you know, I think the fact that these works are transcending the immediate context of their making and that their meaning is compounded over time is really a testament to their strength and the way that they operate deftly. And so I did want to spend a little time on that this evening. I'm not sure if you have anything that you'd want to add.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much summed it up. You know, it's the RWVs came from WMDs, and just I wanted to say that no, those tubes that they found could not be used for refining uranium. They were not made for that. They were for aircraft instances. They were not for use in aircraft. They were not for refining uranium.
Where did you find these?
Well, these tubes are, I found these, I salvaged these from the, you know, from Salvage Yard. And they linked up to another great writer, to Joan Didion. She had written about, they were like these are pool skimming tubes. And I guess they weren't made right either because there was a whole bunch of them that just got trashed. I don't know, they weren't the right tubes for pool skimmers either. But they were the wrong aluminum tubes, so that made them the right aluminum tubes. And color, you know, I always like to work with color, and so these were the right colors to use for this sculpture.
Well, color actually leads us beautifully into the ceramics. We have a whole, oh, I'm sorry, no, actually, let's first talk about this work, Public Jewel, which is outdoors, living in Denver. It was a commission, as I understand it. Can you tell us a bit about this work?
Yeah, so it was commissioned by the GSA, and it sits on a plaza in Denver where there is a federal building and a federal courthouse. And it is the federal courthouse where Timothy McVeigh was tried. Mm. And at the time when I made my first proposal, I had another aspect to this proposal, which was this sort of mound that was going to kind of talk about a watering system, because I don't know if anybody knows it, but in Colorado, all runoff is owned by private companies, not anybody else that can capture it. So I wanted to kind of show that. but it was this mound and it had a cutout in it where you could, like a shade, you could stand it. And so when I went to give the proposal, the very first question that I was asked was, could somebody hide a bomb in here? Could a shooter stand behind this? And I had to say yes. So that was that with that part of the, the proposal. So then I focused on this piece that was at the other end that is titled Public Jewel. And all of the stones and minerals that are in this work were collected from all around Colorado. So it's all from the state of Colorado, which, you know, became a state mostly for its silver deposits. That was the first thing that brought people there to mine it anyway, not the people that lived there originally, but how it became one of the states. And mining is a big part of that state. And but I met a lot of different people, prospectors, gem dealers, stone rock hounds, stone enthusiasts. And so and I worked with a geologist that works at the Colorado School of Mines to pick stones that would last. We kind of gave it for 100 years. That's the other thing I realized, that the term written in stone doesn't really mean anything because stones don't last that long outside, only if it's an inside stone. But yeah, so that's the story of Public Jewel.
Are there different sensibilities or responsibilities that you feel when you know that a work is intended for public or civic space like this, as opposed to the work that you might know is intended for a gallery or museum setting?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that this, I mean, the form, the structure that it's within kind of relates to the building, the one with the frieze, the metal frieze on it, it relates to the window forms. But so I kind of wanted to reiterate the court building. This was the building where Timothy McVeigh was tried, you know, and he was the Oklahoma City bomber, a domestic terrorist. And so I wanted to, you know, talk about that. And I think, you know, yeah, I wanted to be responsible in terms of, you know, I wanted to make a piece that would stand in this plaza and last for at least a while. So that's why that's one of the reasons I chose those materials. The bronze, the kind of surface on the bronze, we got magnification of bronze. And so that's the crystalline form of bronze that was cast into the bronze aspect of that sculpture.
And forgive me, what's the weight of the stone? Do we know?
A lot.
I mean, it's, right.
Yeah. A lot.
Well, it has the precariousness, sort of asteroid-like quality.
Yeah.
Too.
I mean, it's a heavy load above your head, you know. but it's secure. You know, and if you're asking, did I work with engineers to make sure that it's safe? Yes, I definitely did.
I'm sure, especially with the GSA building.
Yeah, right.
Wouldn't let you let you get away with it otherwise.
But it does have that illusion.
Why do we head to, because I know we have so much to look at, I don't want to miss any of it. Let's look at these ceramic works that I believe you started doing in around 2000. You started working with ceramic, and we can just scroll through some of these very beautiful images. But this is, you know, I think that relationship to instability of material and material that maybe you're sort of dancing with, you have a certain amount of control, but then it's going to take on its own life and chart its own path in dialogue with you. That's how I see a lot of these ceramic works. What first drew you to start experimenting with this medium?
I've always been like a big fan of Ken Price's work. I saw it when I first came to Los Angeles. There was a show at LACMA that I saw his work in, and I thought it was great. But I really, you know, I always want material to sort of be part of the message itself. And I wanted to make these sculptures called the Smiles, which were cast porcelain. But I had never studied ceramics, and it worked out. My landlady was the secretary at USC, and I asked her if she thought I could audit Ken Price's class, and so I did for 2 semesters, and that's why I first really learned. I learned from Ken Price, one of the greats.
Way to go.
But he wasn't into slip casting at all. And so, and then I hired a guy that had just graduated from UCLA to help me with the slip casting. His name was Chris Grant, and he has his own production art fabrication company now. But he helped me with that work. But then I went on, and that's why I got a kiln to make those pieces. I had to get a kiln because they were so fragile I could barely move them into the kiln. Yeah. So then I started working with ceramics, and I did a show at Tanya Banakhdar Gallery. I think it was titled After Red Desert, or maybe that's just one of the pieces. And there was a piece I did in there that was a slab work that was supposed to look like a book sitting with its cover up. You know how we open books and put them down on the table like this when we're in a rush and don't put the bookmark in. And that was the first piece, sort of like this. But I did another work there. But anyway, I just got really interested in these forms. And this is a caesura. And the word caesura means a break in one poem, and a break in a poem. And so I like that because it kind of means that there's like this rupture in one thing rather than making it be two different things. And so I started off with that.
How did you settle on wall mounting them? Why was it sort of important to you to install these in this way?
Well, I think I've worked a lot with a corner in the past, and I always wanted to work on the wall, but not necessarily have it be a flat painting. And I think these people have asked me, so are these paintings? I'm like, if you think so, but I just think, are they ceramics? Are they paintings? Are they sculpture? And it's like, I mean, maybe they don't have a name. I don't know. And it doesn't really bother me that much. I think that, just not really knowing, just kind of that surprise of what is this is a good thing. So, so if that answers your question, but these are not glazes. These are epoxy. So at first I was working with epoxy over ceramic, which is plastic.
And then I think we have some images of when you shift from epoxy to glaze as well. So when you say painting, I think, especially in looking at these, about a relationship to color, and also in looking at all of your tiles, your tile backdrop right now, I'm also thinking about color. So how do you approach color with these works?
Yeah, well, I think that, color is important. I really wanted to work with color in sculpture from the beginning. And that was always really important to me because it was sort of like isolating form without color seemed like missing a lot, so I wanted to add that. Yeah. And with the epoxy, both the epoxy and the glaze both have aspects of them of uncontrollability for me. And so, the epoxy would just run for 7 hours. And the glaze is kind of unpredictable, in terms of what's going to happen, especially when you introduce all this other stuff like stones and things like that. So they both have some unpredictable aspects. And this is a calefaction, which means produced by heat, which, kind of talks about how ceramics are made by heat, but also geology is made by heat. Mm-hmm. Why? And so that's what's the title for these. And that's when I started using glaze. Although I did, it was a time when I was doing both. Right now I'm just doing glaze because I've really gotten into it. It's so complicated and interesting and frustrating for me, but it's great. I love it. So.
And the calefaction works, I think, was it around the same time that you were working on Public Jewel that you?
Oh yeah.
With this.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's funny. Yeah, I was working on Public Jewel, and I had 2 studios right next to each other. And in one, I was doing the ceramics, and then the other one I was doing because we cut all the stone in my studio and we made everything. The only thing that was fabricated was the actual base form that held the stone. So we were cutting all the stones and putting them into these forms that would hold them in place, and welding them and bending the metal. And there were all these cutoffs of things that weren't going to go in, like, because we cut some of the stone and we let some of the stone be natural. And there was all these bits left. And I'm like, oh, it's just one day I was like, oh, I wonder what would happen if you, like, because glaze is basically made from minerals, right? So I just wonder what would happen if you put the, like, you know, the thing before it gets ground up and turned into minerals, like into the clay. And that's what started this work.
Sort of texture. And then there are some that have been done more recently, which I have not seen. These images were the first time that I had sort of seen some of the sort of evolutions that you've been making more recently, last year and this year. Maybe we can.
Yeah, so that's glaze.
Yeah.
And that's the unpredictable. Like, I couldn't tell where that was going to drip to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't control that. Like you would if you were painting it, probably, or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. But you know, it just kind of did its thing with the heat and with the glaze and with the form. The other work was tracing the topography of the form, and the glaze does that in its own way too.
Mm-hmm. How much control do you have over the ruptures or the fissures in a piece like the one that we're looking at right now?
Well, this is like a form that's called an inflection, so it has like a form like this. Mm-hmm. And I guess it has 2 inflection points on each side, but you know, I put them over a mold, like a hump mold, I mean a slump mold, mm-hmm. and then whatever happens. And like, I think, you know, a lot of people, when that happens, they fix the crack. You know, you can fix ceramic, you can mend it before it's fired. But I just don't do that. I just don't mend it. And so also one of the reasons to use epoxy for these.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this one, you know, I didn't have much. Yeah, I made like an apparatus so that I could, we call them the tippy tables. I made this, or I had a help making them in the studio. And so you can tip them and make the flow go whichever way you want, but I can't really control the flow. So I sort of learned how to work with that.
How to dance with it. And what's the significance of the title of that last one? We can keep scrolling, but
yeah, so that one comes from you know, referring to a painter who I've always been fascinated by, Pierre Bonnard, and his wife's name was Marthe, although her name was originally Maria, but she took the name Marthe when at some point after they met, and many of his paintings and drawings, she was the model.
Okay.
So this is taken from a self-portrait of Bonnard that he did in 1889, which was about 4 years before they met.
Okay.
So the title is Her Name.
And was it unusual for you to have this sort of specific relationship to a particular artwork that manifests one-to-one like that?
Well, yeah, 1-to-1. I mean, except his face is it's a bit of a détournement, but yeah. But yeah. I mean, you know, there's been other works that I've referenced in the past, you know, like Bird in Space and Lash Mat, and there's been other.
Yeah.
That, but.
And then what about something like this, which was new to me? I hadn't seen work like this come out of your studio before this image arrived.
Yeah, well, there's actually there's a few more like this too, but yeah, this is a scissor and it's glaze and oil paint, and I'm very fond of and admiring of the poet Ariana Reins, and she, when I sent her a picture of it, and she said, "Oh, my two hemispheres of my brain just came together when I looked at this, and I was like, oh, that's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all glazed except for that kind of dark color, the darker kind of brownish red oxblood color is oil paint.
Got it.
And it's a caesura as well.
Okay. And there's such a... Oh, please go on.
They're called Horizon. They're both called Horizon, and Horizon, and they're the same, except one is turned. One is the typical way we see the horizon, and the other is turned like the side of the Earth. Mm-hmm. And so I had those in the show, as below, so above. That I think you saw. Did you see it? I don't know if you saw it in person, but maybe you saw it.
I saw in your studio a few
works
that were in progress, but I never saw the final show, unfortunately.
So these were part of that show, and
and then some that are, I think, just came together last year.
Mm-hmm. This one's called Open Handed, and I showed it in a gallery in Norway, Petterland Gallery, and this was one of the 6 works that I sent there.
So what are the, I'm seeing a question in the Q&A that I'm just going to throw in now because it's applicable, but someone is asking about the means of mounting. Why are the works so suspended so far from the wall, and how are they mounted?
Yeah, well, I wanted them to be in the room, and I also didn't want to continue with this, oh, it's a painting, and it's like they're really very, very physical. I mean, I think when you're with them, you can feel the weight without holding it. When you're standing next to them, like, this is a heavy thing, and I wanted that kind of extreme physical presence to be part of it, so I felt I needed to push them into the room.
I feel like you can get that even through the images that we're seeing. I mean, they've got such heft to them. They do have they create their own geology. Yeah.
I don't try to fix it. I just, if I can help it, I need them to stay together. But if they can stay together and retain their cracks and stuff, I let that be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I think we have, I'm keeping an eye on the clock because I know we have a few more things to get to. This is another piece which I think on first glance sort of creates its own geology. I mean, it looks like a formation that you could find out in the desert. And this was from an exhibition in Los Angeles in 2019. Can you tell us about this work? And in particular, the title of this, I'm interested to hear about.
Yeah, well, so this does have a weird relationship to the public jewel in a way, because in my research for that, I went to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, and I saw all of these different hematite crystals that were on display, and they're all hexagonal, and I was really interested in those, and so I wanted to make. So the title, to get to answer your question, Firestone, is kind of one of those layered titles, which refers to Sholmith Firestone, who was a writer who wrote, and an artist, who wrote the book The Dialectic of Sex, which is kind of a cornerstone or a work of feminist writing that still stands on its own. And so I wanted to think about the idea of the reclining nude, and just like what that meant, and I kind of researched that, and so I sort of put the reclining nude sort of came originally from the harem, and then in Western art, and then went to Paris and was mostly prostitutes that were the only women that would pose for them. So in a way, they were being told how to pose. Like, what's the way? How can you lie down to make my painting look good? And so I was. Yeah, and so I wanted to, try to go back and talk about, that idea of like women at rest and how to kind of come to terms with that. And this is the sculpture I came up with. I thought I was going to keep going and trying to move into making more reclining female figures, but I'm not sure I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm making one more of these that will be an outdoor version. This has to be.
Okay. Yeah. I just, in these very gentle, quiet ways, there are these ghost presences and references to art history and art that sort of thread through all works. And this one in particular, I remember seeing as it was in formation in your studio, as it was sort of the layers were being stacked, and thinking about that reclining figure as it means sort of inescapable if one is an art historian, right?
Right.
So speaking of another female figure, let's go into the next work, which is so different in so many ways, but was part of the same show and is really small. So this is done in bronze with a very vibrant patina. Can you talk about how this came together? Is it figurative work, the scale of it, the color of it? How did this take shape for you?
Strangely, like both of these works were many years in the making. I think I started Firestone in 2010 when I went to that Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. And then this work, I started this sculpture years ago when I took a ceramics class and I was sculpting. I wanted to sculpt the figure, and this is the figure that I started sculpting. And so, then I cast it, and then it was cast. I was going to cast it in bronze, but I didn't like the way the wax turned out. So I had the wax, and then I needed to work on the wax for a really long time. And, and I always wanted her to be kind of disappearing, like running out of the space.
Mm-hmm.
And then the title, and the timing for me is a thing that is important, because this piece, was titled this and made and exhibited, when there was and also ecologically, we talked about that, there's going to be a lot of refugees from global warming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my belief is that, we really need to start now to understand how we can absorb and help all of these people when that time comes. And that's something that we're going to, just like the pandemic, right? We need to start thinking about how to plan for those things and not have somebody destroy all the planning that we made. So I believe, and then you might have to live like a refugee is sort of a reference to the Tom Petty song, You Don't Have to Live Like a Refugee, which is kind of like a strange, boyfriend thing to say. Like, oh, don't worry, honey, you don't have to live like a refugee. Come on, be with me. But so anyway, so this piece came together through all of those forces.
Through all of those forces. What's are titles, do you start with titles? Do they come to you in the middle? Or are they something that you append to the work generally after the fact? Mixture of all of them?
Yeah, it's a mixture. I have a really great, amazing old thesaurus that I make incredible use of all the time whenever I'm trying to think of a title for anything. And it's like one of my past assistants was a wizard, and he called it my grimoire. but
yeah, I follow.
Yeah, but anyway, I think titles are important. I mean, I don't think of myself as a wordsmith, let me say that, but I do definitely, I do think words are powerful, and, titles are about the length of words that I can get right. I know, and I work really hard on getting those right.
Right, yeah. But talk to us about this work, which I think is the last image we have that was from this specific show in 2019.
Right. Yes, these were all from the same show. And this work is called Reef. And I think on Saturday, I believe, yeah, on Saturday, the Art Institute Chicago is going to open and it's going to be installed there. So if you're in Chicago, you can go there and see it. But, you know, this is like, again, about our reefs and like what's happening. And, you know, reefs are really below the surface with just a small bit hint of them above the surface even. And so it's kind of about that. And that's why it's on the floor, because, you know, with the idea kind of also like X, you know, that it could be coming from underneath too.
X is the piece that's outdoors at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. If anyone is curious, we don't unfortunately have an image of it today. So I see one question that's specifically about the title of this exhibition. So I want to ask this before we move on. It's as below, so above, right? Was the title for this show, and the question is whether that has a spiritual connotation.
Well, it does in a way that I mean, you can take it in many ways. But, you know, that idea, and it was from the Emerald Tablet, and which is like very old. They don't even know exactly when it was written, but I think it was found in like the 8th century or something. But they're not sure. And in that text, what I find so interesting is that it was as above, so below, so above. It was always together.
Oh.
But now it's just, in spiritual terms, it's just as above, so below. And I think, you know, I like the reciprocity of the original.
Yeah.
But yeah, but also it's you know, it's about space and that idea of, and also like the way that hierarchies are made, and you know, there's always got to be a top if there's a bottom, right? Or but there's always a bottom if there's a top too, and really that, you know, they should, the relationship of those things that I'm suggesting maybe should be shifted, I suppose.
Yeah. There's a symbiotic
relationship
that we
can't have one without the other, and to just say the one is actually a misinterpretation of the original text.
So we actually, I mean, this work I think maybe is a bridge into what we can show next, because certainly this also is making me think of these islands of plastic that are now forming their own kind of reef style accumulations in our oceans. And I believe that this plastic in particular is germane to the work that you are doing now in the studio in preparation for the exhibition in Zurich next year at the Kunsthalle. So I think there's work that's happening in plastic and in ceramic at the studio. And we thought to close this portion of the talk before we get to our Q&A, that we would just show some details of these works as they're coming together in the studio, and hear from Liz. I asked really if you would read out loud this passage from Octavia Butler that I believe, I'm not sure if it came to you before you started this body of work or you found it as you were making the body of work, but I understand that it's a touchstone as this current body of work is being developed.
No, it came before, but, you know, then I actually read her work. I read Kindred, like not even knowing who she was. I just kind of found it and read it, and it was amazing. But then didn't really realize that was her. This was like one of those books I, you know, just read, and then in the 90s was reintroduced to her, and was reading her work, started reading, because I love science fiction. Ha, surprise, surprise. So this is Octavia Butler's Adulthood Rights. It's the second in the Xenogenesis trilogy. And this is and this is going to be reprinted, I think, for my show, and for this part. So I'll read it to you. Tate, who had reached the house before him, took one of the moving pictures, a small one of Christ, standing on a hill and talking to people, and handed it to Aiken. He moved it slightly in his hand, watching the apparent movement of Christ, whose mouth opened and closed and whose arm moved up and down. The picture, though scratched, was hard and flat, made of a material Aiken did not understand. He tasted it, then threw it hard away from him, disgusted, nauseated. "Hey," one of the scavengers yelled, "those things are valuable." The man retrieved the picture, glared at Aiken, then glared at Tate. "What the hell would you give a thing like that to a baby for anyway?" But both Tate and Sabina had stepped quickly to see what was wrong with Aiken. Aiken went to the door and spat outside several times, spat away pure pain as his body fought to deal with what he had carelessly taken in. By the time he was able to talk and tell what was wrong, he had everyone's attention. He did not want it, but he had it. "I'm sorry," he said. "Did the picture break?" "What's the matter with you?" Tate said with unmistakable concern. "Nothing now. I got rid of it. If I were older, I could have handled it better, made it harmless." "The picture, the plastic, was harmful to you?" "The stuff it was made of, plastic? Yes. It's so sealed and covered with dirt that I didn't feel the poison before I tasted it. Tell the girls not to taste it." "We won't," Amma and Shakat said in unison, and Aiken jumped. He did not know where they had come from. "I'll show you later," he said on Kali. They nodded. "It was more poison packed tighter together in one place than I've ever known. Did humans make it that way on purpose?" "It just worked out that way," Gabe said. "Hell, maybe that's why the stuff is still here. Maybe it's so poisonous or so useless that not even the microbes would eat it." Non-biodegradable, I think, was the pre-war word was. Aiken looked at him sharply. The shuttle had not eaten the plastic, and the shuttle could eat anything. Perhaps plastic, like the truck, had simply been overlooked, or perhaps the shuttle had found it useless, as Gabe had said. "Plastics used to kill people before the war," a woman said. "They were used for furniture, clothing, containers, appliances, just about everything. Sometimes the poisons leached into food or water and caused cancer, and sometimes there was a fire and plastics burned and gassed people to death. My pre-war husband was a fireman. He used to tell me." "I don't remember that," someone said. "I remember it," somebody else contradicted. "I remember a house fire in my neighborhood where everybody died trying to get out because of the poison gas from burning plastics." "My God," Sabina said, "should we be trading this stuff?" "We can trade it," Tate said. "The only place that has enough of it to be a real danger is right here. Other people need things like this, pictures and statues from another time, something to remind them of what we were, what we are."
Oof. And what year was
Plastic glasses.
Yeah.
That was 1980, written in 1988.
Right. So just a year after the first work that we looked at, the first culture work, Orchid, Buttermilk, Penny. So certainly we've been aware of these impending ecological disasters for quite a while now.
Yeah, definitely. You know, one of the things that really spooked me while I was making this work, I was starting to make this work, and I saved a lot of my own family's plastic because, you know, it became clear that like hardly a tiny percentage of plastic is actually being recycled. And I saved a lot of it to make this work, and bought a couple bales of other plastic to work with. But one of the things that was really disturbing to find out was that it was in this article, I think it was the Washington Post, but so when oil was really cheap a few years ago, I think there were all these, I think it was Shell, there were all these companies that were building these giant plastic manufacturing plants because oil, you know, is an important ingredient in plastic. And so I have to say, like, my one of the reasons I want to make this work is I really believe that the manufacturer, like, it's all on the consumer, right? That we have to deal with the plastic. We have to go through and wash all our stuff and put it in the right thing, and then throw it in the thing that is not getting recycled. And so I really hope that what's going to happen in the future is that those that use these materials in manufacturing will have to account for their disposal. Like, for example, see on the left, the little red net, or it's partially red. That's one of those net bags. And we worked really hard to understand all the different kinds of plastics, to be able to identify them so that we could work with them in different ways. And we knew that some we could heat, some we couldn't heat, all that kind of thing. And so, you know, most things that have, like, a lot of things that you get, there are more than one kind of plastic in a container, right? So you've got the lid, that's one kind, then you've got the inside of the lid, that's another, then you've got the bottle. So to really, really take it all apart and separate them is a huge amount of work. But, and so we would call companies and try to find out about it. But the one plastic that we could not find out what it is are these net bags.
So it's still
I still don't know exactly what kind of plastic that is. Say that again, I'm sorry. I missed it.
Oh no, just mysterious. Perennially mysterious. Yeah, talking about the mysteries of sculpture as well.
Yeah, and materiality.
And materiality. So we only have a few minutes left, and want to take as many of these questions as I can, and we can in the time left to us. So we have one that asks about breaks, fissures, and ruptures, noticing that you are drawn to these and wondering why you might be drawn to them.
For lots of reasons. I mean, I think that the smooth has been considered the beautiful for a long time, and it's very, it's an impossible thing to maintain. And so I like to highlight the beauty of the rupture and the reality of the rupture. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, that, you know, these kind of schisms, if you call them, happen all the time. And, you know, what we need to, you know, look at them and understand them, and understand that they are part of our experience. And so that's one reason, I guess. I just think they look amazing too.
They really do. I mean, that I keep thinking about. Linda Benglis used to write about the poured floor works and say that she was after painting that could be felt, not just looked at. And that's what I sort of come back to in hearing you talk about that sort of sense of materiality with the ceramics that have those ruptures or sort of fissures throughout. There is another similar question about rocks and minerals. You mentioned visiting the Rock and Mineral Show and the influence it had on your work. Can you talk a bit more about how much research you tend to do for projects? Is it something that's happened spontaneously, or do you plan a certain amount before you start on a project?
I mean, it's sort of like the idea there's certain things it asks of you. So I have to say, like, it's not that I love to work on something for 21 years. I mean, not 21, but so 2010, so 11 years, you know, to work on artwork for 11 years. It can be kind of daunting, and it gets to be, you know, but sometimes that's what's required to see it through. Mm-hmm. And the same with research. It's like you have this idea, and then when you decide to go with it, you know, you need to find out about it. And sometimes that goes really deep, and there's a lot you have to find out, and you have to keep finding it out and keep researching it. And then different interests do converge. I think maybe for everyone, you know, things do kind of, they come together for you, you know, in these weird forms, whatever they are, and whatever, you know, whatever amounts of certain things come to inflect other things, and it becomes your idea or the thing you want to talk about. I guess that's one way of describing it.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we have time for one more, and please let me apologize to those whose questions we won't have time to get to, but thank you very much. There are so many references to the political as you speak about your process. So how important is it to you that an audience understands all of this research that you're doing, or any of this intention or these layers?
You know, I think it's always there. You know, in my shows, I do have a lot of reference material at the desk.
Mm-hmm.
In my you know, but it's not. I think you get it sort of anyway without that. I do think that objects can speak, and your experience of them will give you something that maybe I had not thought of, but is connected to what I'm thinking through the form and the material and the color. That's how I hope it works. I mean, there's opportunities like this where people ask me questions and I kind of say it, or like Jane's great interview.
Yeah.
Where, you know, that was her. I mean, she said that about the mobs, you know, and it's just like, oh my God, Jane, wow, you soothsayer, you know what I mean? Like, it's wild.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I in a way, it's like, that's one of the great things about being an artist is you can't take credit for everything that like people think about. And I don't want, you know, I don't want to control that. I can say my ideas about it, but I like to hear your ideas about it too.
I think you get a lot of credit for giving us all a lot to think about in all of the hard work that you do. So thank you very much, Liz, for your time and
so much
this with us. Thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening. Thank you again to Sarah and to Lindsay for their assistance tonight. We want to thank my colleagues at the Hirshhorn and all of those at Regan Projects in Los Angeles who helped us prepare for this evening. And we want to wish everyone well, and please join us again next Wednesday. My colleague Johnny Jetzer will be in conversation with Rachel Rose. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.